What would you do if, on the happiest day of your child's life, you carried a secret worth more than anyone could imagine? On the day my son graduated, while everyone celebrated his success, I carried a silence that weighed heavier than any speech I could give. My late father had left me a fortune, $25 million worth of luxury villas overlooking the ocean. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to reveal the truth. Not to my son, not to my family, not even in a quiet whisper. This isn't just a story about hidden wealth or expensive beachfront properties. It's a story about love, legacy, and the painful decisions that come with inheritance. It's about the conflict between protecting family bonds and revealing a secret that could change everything. In this video, I'll take you inside the untold story of my father's last gift, the $25 million inheritance that shaped my life and tested my silence. Stay with me, because the lesson behind this hidden fortune is worth more than the money itself. The morning of my son's graduation day was painted in gold. The sun had barely risen, yet the entire city seemed to glow with anticipation. For most parents, a graduation ceremony is simply a proud milestone, a chance to clap, cheer, and capture photographs to treasure forever. But for me, it was something more complicated, something far heavier. As I slipped into my carefully chosen outfit, I rehearsed my smile in the mirror. I wanted to look like any proud parent that morning, glowing with joy at the thought of their child walking across that stage. Inside, however, my chest felt tight. Beneath my carefully composed appearance was a secret, one I had guarded for years. The truth about the $25 million luxury villas my late father had left behind. I arrived at the campus early. Families crowded the lawn, balloons floated in the air, and camera flashes sparkled like fireflies. Mothers and fathers embraced their children with pride, their conversations bubbling with excitement about the future. Some spoke of graduate school, others of new jobs. Some even joked about how expensive college had been. I stood among them, smiling politely, but my thoughts wandered elsewhere, to the fortune no one around me knew I held. When my son finally appeared, dressed in his cap and gown, my heart skipped. He looked taller, older, more certain of himself than ever before. He waved from across the crowd, his smile wide and full of life. In that instant, I wanted to run to him, to tell him everything, not just how proud I was, but also about the inheritance, the luxury villas by the sea, the wealth that could change his life forever. But I didn't. Instead, I clapped loudly, cheering with the other parents, my voice almost breaking. I shouted his name, capturing videos on my phone like everyone else. Outwardly, I was the picture of joy. Inwardly, my silence was louder than any cheer. The graduation ceremony itself felt endless. Speeches were given about the importance of perseverance, hard work, and chasing dreams. Professors spoke of knowledge as the greatest gift, while classmates shared stories of late-night study sessions and unshakable friendships. I listened, applauded, even laughed at the light-hearted jokes, but every word reminded me of the secret I carried. Because while others spoke of dreams waiting to be built, I already had the foundation of a dream locked away in my name. Sprawling villas worth $25 million. Villas I hadn't even dared to visit since my father's passing. Villas that whispered of a legacy too heavy to share on a day meant to celebrate my son's achievements, not my hidden wealth. After the ceremony, my son found me in the crowd. He wrapped his arms around me in a hug so tight, I could feel the rhythm of his heartbeat against mine. "Mom," he said, "we did it." His voice was filled with relief, pride, and hope for the future. I held him close, whispering back, "Yes, we did." But what I wanted to say was different. Yes, we did. And there's so much more waiting for you than you could ever imagine. We posed for photos together, his cap tilted slightly, his smile radiant. Friends of his joined us, and we laughed, shared stories, and clinked plastic cups of sparkling cider. To everyone else, I was simply a proud parent enjoying a family moment. Only I knew that behind my smile lay an untold story, one of inheritance, secrecy, and the impossible decision of when, or if, to share the truth. That night, as the celebrations wound down and the campus grew quiet, I sat alone in my car. The sound of distant laughter echoed through the parking lot as graduates celebrated their newfound freedom. I looked at the photo of my son in his gown, saved on my phone, and tears filled my eyes. I asked myself again, was I doing the right thing by staying silent? The inheritance was not just money, it was responsibility, history, and a symbol of my father's legacy. Telling my son about it on his graduation day would have shifted the spotlight from his achievement to my secret. And so, I chose silence. But even in my silence, I knew that one day, the truth would have to surface. The inheritance came into my life like an unexpected storm, sudden, powerful, and impossible to ignore. My father had always been a man of quiet dignity, someone who lived simply despite his success. He never flaunted his wealth, never spoke of numbers, never hinted at the true scale of what he owned. To the outside world, he was just a respected man with wisdom in his eyes and a calm presence that drew people to him. To me, he was simply Dad, the one who taught me to ride a bike, to solve problems with patience, and to believe that character mattered more than anything money could buy. When he passed away, the grief consumed me so fully that I didn't think about material things at all. I was mourning the loss of his voice, his advice, the small rituals we shared. It wasn't until weeks later, when his lawyer asked to meet with me, that the weight of what he left behind revealed itself. I remember sitting in that cold office, the blinds half drawn, papers stacked neatly on the lawyer's desk. I thought it would be about funeral expenses, a few savings accounts, maybe some family heirlooms. But then the lawyer slid a thick envelope across the table and spoke words that left me breathless. Your father has left you ownership of several luxury villas valued at over $25 million. I stared at him, stunned. The words felt foreign, impossible to process. My father, my humble, soft-spoken father, had owned that much? I opened the folder, my eyes scanning through documents, deeds, property valuations. There were photos, too. Sprawling beachfront villas, modern mansions with glass walls overlooking the ocean, private gardens, and infinity pools that melted into the horizon. They looked like something out of a dream, but the paperwork confirmed they were real. And they were mine. I wanted to cry, but not out of joy. It was confusion, disbelief, and a sense of betrayal tangled together. Why hadn't he told me? Why had he chosen to live so modestly while holding such immense wealth in his name? The lawyer explained that my father had been deliberate about it. He wanted you to understand life without money defining you. He believed wealth should be a gift, not a crutch. His words echoed in my mind long after I left that office. That night, I couldn't sleep. I scrolled endlessly through the property photos, zooming in on details, the carved wooden doors, the lush gardens, the balconies overlooking endless seas. They were stunning, yet each image carried the weight of a responsibility I hadn't asked for. This wasn't just real estate. This was a legacy. Over the following weeks, I learned more about my father's past, things he had never shared with me. He had made investments decades earlier, quietly purchasing land when it was cheap, developing properties with patience and vision. While others chased fast money, he built something lasting, The villas were not simply assets, they were symbols of his foresight, his discipline, and perhaps his way of protecting me long after he was gone. But with the inheritance came silence. I couldn't tell my friends. How could they possibly understand? I couldn't tell my son, not yet. He was still young, still building his own identity. Dropping the weight of 25 mallards onto his shoulders might crush him before he even had the chance to stand tall on his own. And so, the secret became mine to bear. I continued to live modestly, working, saving, budgeting like any other middle-class parent. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, everything had. Every time I passed by a luxury real estate advertisement or overheard people talking about financial struggles, I felt the secret pressing against my chest. I knew what I held could erase many problems, open countless doors, and change my son's future instantly. Yet I also knew that revealing it too soon could breed resentment, jealousy, or even greed. The inheritance was more than money. It was a test of patience, of timing, and of trust. My father hadn't left me with instructions, but his silence spoke volumes. He wanted me to decide when the truth should be revealed. On my son's graduation day, standing in the crowd, cheering for him, that inheritance burned in my mind more than ever. Watching him step into adulthood, I wondered if the time had finally come to tell him. Yet I stayed quiet, honoring the balance my father had kept his whole life, the balance between wealth and wisdom, between silence and revelation. The 25 Mallard villas weren't just properties, they were the embodiment of a lesson my father had lived by. That money means little without the character to carry it. And so, I remained silent for now. Secrets have a way of growing heavier with time. At first, the inheritance felt surreal, like a dream I could tuck away in a drawer and forget. But as the years passed, the knowledge of those 25 Mallards luxury villas became less of a gift and more of a burden I carried in silence. Every family has secrets. Some are small, embarrassing moments, forgotten arguments, mistakes no one talks about. But others are massive, life-altering truths that can reshape relationships in a single breath. My inheritance fell into the second category. It wasn't just money. It was power, opportunity, and responsibility, all wrapped into one unspoken truth. At times, I longed to share it with my son. There were moments when he struggled financially, working late nights at his part-time job, counting every dollar for tuition, or skipping outings with friends because he couldn't afford them. I wanted so badly to reach out, to say, "You don't have to worry. We have something. You are safe." But I didn't, because telling him the truth would have changed everything. I had seen how money could corrupt people. Friends who once trusted each other tore their relationships apart over inheritances. Cousins who barely spoke suddenly appeared when wills were read. Money, I learned, magnified the best and worst in people. And my father's silence about his wealth had been intentional. He wanted me to know the value of life without leaning on riches. And so, I kept quiet. But silence comes with its own price. It gnawed at me during conversations. When neighbors talked about mortgages, I nodded sympathetically, hiding the fact that I could buy their houses outright if I wanted to. When colleagues stressed over retirement plans, I listened and encouraged, while secretly knowing that my financial future was already secured. The heaviest moments, though, came within my own home. Watching my son wrestle with challenges I could have solved in an instant was agonizing. Once, he came to me, shoulders slumped, eyes tired, and said, "Mom, sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I work, I'll never get ahead." I hugged him tightly whispering words of encouragement, but inside, guilt twisted like a knife. I wasn't lying when I told him he was capable. He truly was. But I was lying by omission, by keeping from him the existence of a safety net he didn't even know was there. The inheritance had become a secret too heavy to share. Not just because of the wealth itself, but because of the ripple effects it could cause. If I told my son, how long before he told someone else? How long before friends, acquaintances, or even strangers began to treat us differently? Money doesn't just open doors. It changes how people see you, how they expect you to live, how they measure your worth. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I was doing the right thing. Was I protecting my son? Or was I holding him back? Was I honoring my father's wishes? Or betraying my own child's trust? It was a constant tug of war between two voices in my head. One whispered, "Tell him. He deserves to know. He could live without fear, without struggle." The other countered, "Stay silent. He needs to build his own strength first. Wealth means nothing without wisdom." And in the middle stood me, trapped by a silence that grew heavier with each passing year. The secrecy even seeped into my interactions with extended family. Some relatives suspected my father had left something behind, but they assumed it was modest. I never corrected them. I never hinted at the truth. To do so would have been like opening Pandora's box. Once released, the consequences could never be undone. Keeping the inheritance a secret meant carrying an invisible load. It shaped the way I thought, the way I planned, even the way I loved. I celebrated my son's victories with pride, but always with a shadow lingering in the back of my mind. Would he still be proud if he knew the truth I'm hiding? The burden wasn't just financial. It was emotional, moral, and deeply personal. It was about trust, timing, and the fear of how a single confession could fracture the life I had carefully built. I often wished my father had left me more than just villas and documents. I wished he had left me guidance, instructions, or even a letter explaining when and how to reveal the truth. Instead, all I had was silence. And now, silence was what I gave in return. That silence was my shield, but also my prison. Silence is rarely empty. Sometimes silence is heavier than words. For years, my silence about the $25 inheritance seemed like the safest choice, but over time, it began to carve deep cracks into my heart and my relationships. At first, keeping the secret felt like protecting my son. I convinced myself that I was shielding him from the dangers of greed, envy, or misplaced expectations. But silence has a way of changing you. It shapes the way you think, the way you interact, and even the way you love. And slowly, I realized that my silence was not just protecting him, it was consuming me. There were countless small moments when the burden revealed itself. When my son struggled to pay rent during college, I wanted to step in with the truth. When he skipped vacations with friends because of money, I wanted to whisper, "You don't have to live like this." When he told me about his worries for the future, my throat tightened with words I couldn't say. Each time, I swallowed the truth, and each time, it grew heavier inside me. The weight of silence isn't measured in words withheld. It's measured in trust withheld. Every time I kept quiet, I felt as though I was betraying him, even though my intention was to protect. It was a cruel paradox. I was keeping the secret for his sake, but in doing so, I was building a wall between us. It also changed how I viewed myself. Outwardly, I appeared like any other parent, budgeting carefully, planning for retirement, stressing over bills. Inwardly, I knew I didn't have to. I knew that, at any moment, the inheritance could wipe away those worries. Yet I kept playing the role because revealing the truth would unravel everything. The dissonance wore me down, like a constant act I couldn't step away from. The silence even followed me into my sleep. Nights became restless, filled with dreams of villas standing empty by the sea, their windows glowing like watchful eyes. I dreamed of my father, too, his voice echoing with words I couldn't decipher, his gaze reminding me of the responsibility I carried. I woke up with a heavy chest, the weight of both silence and legacy pressing down on me. And then there was the guilt. Not guilt for having the inheritance, but for keeping it hidden. Every time my son worked himself to exhaustion, every time he hesitated to chase an opportunity because of finances, I felt like I was failing him. I told myself he needed to struggle to grow, to value his own independence. But deep down, I wondered if I was simply afraid of what would happen once the truth came out. Would he resent me for keeping it from him? Would he see me as a liar instead of a protector? Would he think all the years of financial struggle were unnecessary? These questions haunted me, circling my mind like vultures. Silence also affected the way others saw me. My friends confided in me about their money problems, and I listened empathetically. But behind my nods and comforting words, there was a voice whispering, "You could help them. You have the means." But I didn't. I couldn't. Revealing the inheritance would expose everything, and once the truth was out, it could never be taken back. The price of silence was isolation. I carried the secret alone, unable to share it fully with anyone. It was like holding a treasure chest chained to my soul. Valuable, yes, but unbearably heavy. The longer I carried it, the more it changed me. Even moments of joy were tainted. On my son's graduation day, I should have felt only pride. And I did, but mixed with that pride was the gnawing weight of what I wasn't saying. Every smile, every hug, every photo felt like a half-truth. Outwardly, I was celebrating him. Inwardly, I was hiding something that could change his life forever. That's the cruel thing about silence. It doesn't just protect, it corrodes. It eats away at joy, at trust, at closeness. I loved my son with all my heart, but my silence stood between us like a shadow I couldn't chase away. And still, I remained silent. Because the alternative, speaking the truth, felt even riskier. The inheritance wasn't just wealth, it was a story of my father's sacrifices, his wisdom, his vision. It wasn't something to drop casually into conversation. It demanded the right moment, the right maturity, the right understanding, and until then, silence was the only option. But that silence had a cost, and I paid it every single day. With my peace of mind, with my sleep, with my ability to be fully honest with the person I loved most in the world. That was the true weight of silence. Whenever the silence of the inheritance grew too heavy, I found myself drifting back into memories of my father. His presence was still alive in fragments. The sound of his footsteps on the porch, the way he whistled when working in the garden, the warm scent of his coffee early in the morning. To the world, he had been a man of few words. To me, he was everything. My guide, my protector, my anchor. He never boasted about money. In fact, if you asked anyone who knew him, they would tell you he was modest to the point of seeming ordinary. He wore simple clothes, drove the same car for decades, and preferred family dinners at home to extravagant outings. To a stranger, he might have looked like just another hard-working father. And maybe that was the way he wanted it. But behind that modest exterior was a sharp mind and a quiet discipline. As I grew older, I began to notice small details, His habit of reading financial newspapers long after retiring, the way he paid attention to property markets, and the subtle advice he gave me about patience, saving, and foresight. "Don't chase quick wins," he once told me. "Chase what lasts." At the time, I thought he was talking about life choices. Only later did I realize he was also talking about investments. One of my clearest memories was sitting with him on the beach when I was a teenager. We watched the sun dip into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. He pointed toward a stretch of empty coastline and said, "One day, people will fight to live where no one is looking now. Land never loses its value. It only waits for its time." I laughed then, thinking it was just one of his quiet musings. But years later, that very stretch of coastline became the site of one of the villas he had purchased. My father had seen what others couldn't. He had the patience to wait, the courage to invest, and the wisdom to stay silent until the time was right. He didn't talk much about inheritance, but in his own way, he prepared me for it, not through words, but through lessons. He taught me that wealth was not about the size of your bank account, but about the size of your character. He showed me that money could build, but it could also destroy, depending on how it was handled. When I finally learned about the 25 villas, it felt less like a surprise and more like the final piece of a puzzle. Everything he had ever taught me suddenly made sense. His frugality wasn't out of necessity, it was a choice. His modest lifestyle wasn't ignorance, it was wisdom. He wanted me to grow up learning the value of hard work, resilience, and humility before I ever touched his hidden fortune. Looking back, I realized he had never wanted me to inherit just wealth. He wanted me to inherit perspective. That's why he didn't tell me outright. If he had revealed his fortune while alive, maybe I would have grown up differently, less driven, less grounded, less appreciative of struggle. By keeping his wealth a secret, he gave me the freedom to build my own foundation first. Sometimes, I wished he had left me a letter, something to guide me in the years after his passing. But maybe he already had. His letter was in the memories, the lessons, the values he instilled in me. His silence had always carried meaning, and now my silence carried it forward. I remembered the time he told me, "Money can buy almost anything except wisdom. That part you earn on your own." At the time, I thought it was just a phrase. Now, I saw it as his philosophy of life. When I sat in the villas for the first time, walking barefoot across polished marble floors and staring out at endless waves, I didn't just see property. I saw his patience, his vision, his ability to plan decades ahead. I saw a man who worked quietly while others shouted, who built slowly while others rushed, who believed in the future, even when no one else did. The inheritance was not meant to make me rich. It was meant to remind me of him. It was his way of saying, "I trust you. I believe you're ready to carry this forward." And maybe, in keeping the inheritance secret from my son, I was trying to do the same. To give him the chance to build his own strength first, to understand struggle before discovering abundance, just as my father had done with me. The villas may have been worth 25 malars, but the true gift was the wisdom behind them. And in the quiet corners of my memory, I knew my father would rather I pass down that legacy, more than the wealth itself. For years, silence had been my shield. It was the invisible wall I built to protect my son from a truth I wasn't sure he was ready to hear. But life has a way of tearing down the walls we cling to. My turning point came when the comfort of silence was no longer an option. It was tested by crisis. It began with a phone call late one night. My son's voice trembled on the other end, heavier than I'd ever heard before. "Mom," he said, "I think I'm in trouble." He had been working tirelessly after graduation, juggling jobs to make ends meet while chasing his dream career. In his determination, he'd taken a financial risk, signing on to a business venture with friends. At first, it seemed promising, but the company collapsed almost as quickly as it began, leaving him burdened with debt he couldn't pay back. The weight in his voice pierced through me. He wasn't just worried, he was broken. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. I sat in silence, my heart pounding. Here it was, the moment I had always feared and anticipated, the very situation my father's inheritance could have prevented. The secret I had carried for so long suddenly felt like a chain choking me. I could have told him everything right then. I could have lifted the burden from his shoulders with a single confession. "You don't have to suffer. We have enough. You are safe." The words sat on my tongue, burning to be spoken, but I hesitated. Revealing the inheritance would change everything, not just for him, but for us. Would he see me as his mother still? Or would he see me as the gatekeeper of a fortune I had denied him all these years? Would he feel betrayed? Angry? Relieved? I didn't know. Instead, I listened as he poured out his fears. I offered comfort, advice, and encouragement, just as I always had. But inside, my soul was at war. Over the following weeks, the situation grew worse. Debt collectors began calling him, and I saw the exhaustion in his face each time we met. His once bright smile had dimmed. He was living under the crushing weight of financial failure, and I was living under the crushing weight of silence. The turning point came one evening when he showed up at my door, his eyes red, his shoulders slumped. He dropped onto the couch and whispered, "Mom, I don't know if I can keep going like this." That was the moment something broke inside me. My silence was no longer protecting him. It was hurting him. The very reason I had kept the inheritance hidden was to ensure he grew strong and independent. But now, my silence was pushing him into despair. I excused myself to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I gripped the counter. I could hear my father's voice in my memory. "Wealth means nothing without wisdom." But what about compassion? What about timing? What about the people we love when they're drowning? I realized then that the true test wasn't just about keeping the secret, it was about knowing when to reveal it. That night, I didn't tell him everything. Not yet, but I made a decision. The silence couldn't last much longer. The turning point wasn't just about his financial crisis, it was about my understanding of legacy. My father had trusted me to decide the right moment. Maybe that moment had finally come. For the first time, I began to prepare myself for the conversation I had been avoiding for years. I pulled out the old documents, the deeds, the photographs of the villas. I held them in my hands, my heart racing, imagining the look on my son's face when I finally revealed the truth. Would he be shocked? Grateful? Angry? I didn't know. But I did know this. My silence had run its course. The turning point had arrived, and it was forcing me to make a choice I could no longer avoid. And deep down, I knew my father would want me to choose love over fear, truth over silence. Life has a way of teaching us lessons in the most unexpected ways. For me, the $25 inheritance was never just about wealth. It was about silence, responsibility, and the invisible threads that bind generations together. It was about love, legacy, and the choices we make when faced with truths too heavy to share. For years, I believed keeping the secret was an act of protection. I told myself my son needed to grow strong without leaning on wealth, just as my father had intended. And perhaps that was true. But what I learned along the way was that silence, while powerful, can also become a burden that distances us from those we love most. The turning point with my son's struggles forced me to confront the reality I had been avoiding. Secrets don't just protect, they also isolate. By withholding the truth, I wasn't only guarding him, I was denying him the trust of knowing me fully. In trying to honor my father's legacy, I risked weakening my bond with my son. The greatest lesson I learned was that wealth is not the inheritance. Love is, trust is, wisdom is. The villas, the fortune, the properties, they were symbols of my father's foresight. But the real gift was the way he raised me, to be patient, humble, and mindful of what truly matters. And that is the gift I needed to pass on to my son. When the day finally came to reveal the truth, I sat with him at the kitchen table, documents spread before us, my hands trembling as I spoke the words I had carried for so long. His eyes widened in disbelief, then softened with something I hadn't expected: understanding. He wasn't angry. He wasn't resentful. He simply reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Mom, I get it. You wanted me to find my own strength first, and I did." In that moment, I realized my silence hadn't been in vain. It had been a bridge, an uncomfortable one, yes, but one that carried us to a deeper place of trust. My father's legacy was no longer just villas and numbers on paper. It was the wisdom to know that timing, love, and patience matter more than any fortune. The inheritance had taught me that money can solve problems, but it can't replace character. It can open doors, but it can't build relationships. It can provide comfort, but it can't create meaning. Those things come from love, from resilience, and from the way we choose to carry each other through life. The villas still stand by the sea, magnificent and valuable, but I no longer see them as a secret I must carry alone. Instead, I see them as a symbol of my father's belief in me, and now of my belief in my son. They are no longer just properties. They are a reminder that our greatest inheritance is not what we own, but what we learn, what we share, and what we pass on in love. If I could offer one lesson from this untold story, it would be this: don't measure legacy by wealth. Measure it by the values you leave behind, the strength you nurture in your family, and the love that outlives you. Money fades, properties crumble, but love and wisdom, those are eternal. And that is the lesson I carry forward. That is the lesson my father left me. And that is the lesson I now leave with my son.